Touria, est-ce que tu peux envoyer un message à Cheikh et lui dire qu'on ne le voit pas?
On va commencer. Chut.
He's texting me right now.
OK. Mais on démarre ou pas?
Voilà, nous sommes donc dans la deuxième partie donc, de ce rendez-vous avec des panélistes, des communicants, des personnalités afro-américaines. Et on va laisser donc Dave Marifal mener les discussions pour 1h30, 1h45 avec justement tout ce panel, tous ces afro-américains qui sont là et qui se connectent à cette communauté africaine du continent et de la diaspora pour évoquer avec nous évidemment le racisme et la nécessaire obligation d'avoir cette unité africaine. Marie Deifal, on vous laisse donc le micro pour cette rencontre. Merci à tous d'être là. Bonne discussion, bon débat.
Thank you, Melina. Good morning, everybody. And thank you all for having accepted to join us on this first encounter, to discuss not only about what happened in Minneapolis and this horrible death of George Floyd, but at the same time, reflect on how we can make a difference in combating racism and building towards African unity. So I will not take too much time. I think that most of us know what the problems are, and we should look into where the solutions will come from. And I'm going to let you take the floor one after the other and give us your opinion, and eventually also on the second round, the practical, concrete proposals to put on the table to get us towards the, within the next 3 years, towards the practical, concrete solutions to at least, if we cannot eradicate racism within the next 3 years, at least contribute dramatically to its eradication. So I'm going to give the floor to whoever wishes to break the ice. Who would like to come first? Please. Okay, I'm going to take one of my sons, Sheikh.
All right. So my name is Sheikh Jain. I moved to the US 8 years ago after living in France for about 8 years ago as well. I am a son of Senegal, but I'd like to say that I am a global citizen because I consider home to be the place where I'm welcome. Talking about home, I've been struggling these past years with America because of these late issues that I've certainly encountered in France, but with a different degree, at a different degree. And here I, for the first time in my life, felt that I was in a place where I could die. Not to say that in Massachusetts, this is very present in terms of police violence, but I choose carefully places I would visit or I would go to or in vacation, because I wouldn't be that confident about being in a safe and secure place. And that's a sentiment that is unacceptable overall. And like many of us, I've been shocked, hurt, profoundly hurt about what I saw in Minneapolis, because again, this was a Black young man who, regardless of the reason why police came, but who had his life endangered and was ultimately killed by the police for things that did not deserve to be that way. So overall, I mean, just to throw some idea, and it's funny because I was talking about it with my sister Toya Jan, and she's also on the call yesterday, and I think what I can see from all these events, it's that if you combine overprotection with how can I put it? If you put too much protection and too much so bottom line, what I'm trying to say is the result of impunity is a result of two elements: too much power and too much protection. So even if police is a body that needs to have some power, they should be also monitored, and they cannot be overly protected. So if you combine those two, too much power and too much protection, then even a kid, if you give him too much capability and no accountability and too much protection, at some point a kid will abuse of it, because they know that there won't be any consequences on what they do, because overall and bottom line is that they are protected. So it's going to be always extremely hard for them to be accountable. So I think in one of those measures that needs to come out of this movement, we need to rethink what is the police and who they are, who they should be, and what can help us to reduce their sense of impunity. And if we can reach that, I think it's one of the problems. Of course, there are like many other problems, which are inequality, access to jobs, access to wealth, access to education, but at least for people to feel at least not frightened by the police, I think that's a major step that needs to come out. It's they need to reduce and they need to get rid of impunity. And if that can be reached, I think we have at least one box that is checked.
Okay, thank you very much, Cher. Thanks a lot. I'm going to go to maybe somebody who's more of my age. I'm going to give the floor to Mike Besley. He's much younger than I am, but at least he's older than you, Sheikh. Mike, your mic is not on. Your mic is off. Okay.
Yes, thank you. I did say I do appreciate that introduction. that we are of the same age. I like that. Appreciate it. I'm not going to speak about the problem because so many people have spoken of what the problem is and been eloquent about it in many ways. I'm going to suggest that, you know, what I would like to see out of this meeting is we start to talk about what we're going to do about the problem. And I think you mentioned combating racism and unity. And on combating racism, we have to decide how we're going to go about it. Are we going to ask the people that are creating the problem, that are the racists, are we going to ask them to stop? Or are we, the people that are being affected by the racism, are we going to talk about what we're going to do to make the changes, okay? And if you choose the latter, you know, I don't think you can do that without a base of political or economical power. So if we think we want to change it, I think we have to think somewhere around those two pieces, okay? There's things we have to do in those areas. So that would be my thought on racism, combating racism. On the point of unity, whether there's racism or not, I think the Black communities, the Black tribes should get together all over this earth. It just makes sense. And I think we should think about that as a group and figure out how we want to take steps toward bringing this Black community together. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This is very inspiring, and I do totally agree on those lines. So we'll listen to somebody else. Barbara Howard. Barbara, your mic is not on.
Yeah, okay. You hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I agree with the last speaker. I think we've got to also work with our Congress, you know, our elected leaders. And I think what we have to do is make sure that we get young people out to vote, because at least in the United States, so much of what happens is at the local level. And we have people who only vote in, you know, every 4 years for the president. But we've got to start somewhere. And I think that's very important if we can try to change, get the kinds of people that we want to represent us, and then make sure that these people look like the communities that they're representing. I was so pleased to see that Ferguson, Missouri has just elected its first female mayor and its first African-American mayor. You know, so that's the kind of change. It's going to be slow, but I think we can't give up. And I just think that if we can all unite, which is going to be difficult in some ways, but I think it can be done if we start thinking as the young man said, the tribes, the Black tribes, because that's basically what we all are. And rather than trying to divide ourselves as some people in our respective communities do. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Joe, would you like to intervene at this point? Joe Noel?
Okay, yes, I would just like to second what Barbara said, that we have got to get young people out to vote. Trump won a number of states by a very small margin last time. And in fact, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and tens of thousands of people who were eligible to vote in Detroit didn't vote, and that was the margin he needed to win the state. And so it's really necessary to get young people especially out to vote and get them registered. So I think that that's probably the best thing we can do, is to get people out to vote, and as Barbara said, put in the officials we want who can help us out. Thanks.
Okay, so if we take things, we know that we need to get into politics, because voting means that you get interested in what is happening in your country. Yeah. We have to show also the will to construct, to build this Black tribe. We have to do it through different means, which we have, of course, education and business, because if you don't have the means, you won't get where you want to go. So now can I give the floor to Joseph Edmonds?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to join you. I agree with the previous speakers. I want to just throw out three kind of ideas. One would be, I want us to move from the language of reform to the language of abolition. I know that many of you have seen in response to the crises that took place in Minneapolis and throughout the country and really throughout the world, that folks are now saying we might not be able just to reform police, we need to abolish the system as it currently exists, right? And so we need to think about ways in which abolition could be a tool or a mechanism that we might be able to use. And there are lots of academic resources that we can look at. We can look at Angela Davis and her work on the abolition of mass incarceration, and other folks that have addressed this kind of explicit and important differentiation between reform and abolition. And we can talk more about that. The second one is I want to think a little bit about reparation, right? And I mean, that has been a long history of reparations. Obviously, most recently, we have Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in The Atlantic, A Case for Reparations. We have a long history in our academic world about thinking about that amongst diasporic people. But I think that we've got to look at reparation on a micro level. Like, how do we repair for the damage of these folks that have been harmed by police brutality and police violence, right? So the families of these African American or African dispersed men and women that were damaged by that. But also, how do we think about reparations more broadly as a policy intervention that is now gaining more traction as we look to democratic socialism, as we think about a kind of a critique of neoliberal capital, that reparation needs to come back into the way that we think about policy interventions and policy concerns. And then finally, I'm really interested in, I do a lot of work with elementary and middle school students, is how do we think about a syllabus or a curriculum for dismantling white supremacy as a part of a mainline platform curriculum for all students, right? In the same way, I grew up in the 80s, and we learned very early on that if you saw someone selling drugs or taking drugs, or that it was a part of your explicit responsibility and role to kind of call that kind of problematic behavior out. I don't know if you guys remember, Reagan and Nancy Reagan's war against drugs. We need a war against white supremacy. We need a war that will dismantle the structures of this, and we need to bring all types of students, K through 12, as whistleblowers against white supremacy, right? They should be deputized or, coordinated and enrolled into the project of challenging white supremacy wherever they see it. And we need to teach young African and African-American children, but also young children of any racial category, that their role is to call out and dismantle white supremacy wherever they see it. So those are the three things I want to throw into the conversation: abolition, reparation, and a K through 12 curriculum of dismantling white supremacy.
Thank you very much, Joe. So you see, I have two sons, one Senegalese son and an Afro-American son. So I am a person of the world, and I hope that I will be able to leave a seed that these sons and daughters, because I have some of them also around, will be able to make sure that the seeds will grow and become a very strong tree. Thank you, Joseph, for these three very important steps to be undertaken, of course, within the American continent and more especially in the US, because this is a real, true problem to be faced and solved within the United States. And now maybe I can give the floor to Rufus. Rufus White, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, I really appreciate and I'm honored to be a part of this call and this initiative. Also, just a little bit of my background. I have had some formative experience in the Deep South, which is Alabama. I spent a lot of my K through 12 years in Washington, D.C. And my later years, I've been primarily based in California, but doing a lot of travel in Europe, Asia, and across the U.S. In all of those places, there is a common experience that I've had, and I'm sure we all have had it, and that is that there is a worldwide Eurocentric attitude of privilege, and not just an attitude, but they're living it. And one of the things that I advocate is that we as a people move away from buying into that. And I believe the term is really brainwashed, that we are bought into it because of the way the European power structure brainwashes the world and have us just living the buy-in. So to move away from that buy-in, we need to do, I think, a couple things. One is to understand that it's happening and acknowledge it every time we see it. In doing that, we must also, and I think it was Joseph, you talked about the K through 12, the youth. We must make our youth aware and give them the tools to be defensive and to form initiatives to shield themselves from the brainwashing and to form our own ability to define ourselves and be ourselves. Okay, the structure around which I think this can be built is value-based. Across the world, I think there's a set of values that Afrocentric people share. Through those values, we can rally ourselves and form a common bond that will allow us to be successful against this white privilege bondage, okay? There also needs to be economic initiatives where we take responsibility and control of our economic situations individually, as communities, as well as worldwide, and share those initiatives, the ones that are successful, and then repeat them. So we need to take lessons from those who have been very, very successful, such as the now defunct Black Panthers and the Harlem Initiative in education, where the model was actually repeatable. So if you find a way to be successful, then we must repeat that and drive it. And in parallel with that, we must gain and sustain socio-political power, which we basically don't have. And socio-political power, in my view, is gaining control of our own environments, participating in the political structure, gaining leadership spots, and executing our power and abilities there, and driving the political system. And these can become tactical as well as strategic objectives, you know, that build upon each other and then can be integrated across our worldwide community.
Thank you very much. So we see that education is key to education and awareness, because of course we have to be aware of what has happened, like the brainwashing, and of course have the young generation become aware of those and give them the tools and the means to be able to get to where we wish to arrive. I think that I'm going to give now the floor to Wilorma from London. Wilorma? Do you hear me, Wilorma?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm based in the UK, originally I was born in the UK, but I'm from Sierra Leone. So the UK has responded in shock to the events in the US, and we've we're all in the spirit of standing with our US brothers and sisters. We know that the context is slightly different in the UK, but there are parallels in the experiences that our US brothers and sisters have had. There's been an outpouring of support in the UK. People are saying that, you know, they're willing to listen. These are white colleagues, really. White people are kind of feeling a bit, I get the sense that they're feeling a bit guilty. And well, this is in my professional network, for example, because I'm actually on LinkedIn, and usually on LinkedIn, people do not talk about things like politics or race, but people have just suddenly opened up. Blacks are talking about their experiences in the workplace, and that's made sort of, you know, the leaders are all sort of thinking, what can we do to support? There's been posts around what can you do to support your Black colleague, ask them how they're feeling, etc., etc. I think really, I'm a bit disappointed with our Africa. We're talking about African unity. I'm a bit disappointed with our African leaders and the fact that they haven't really, apart from a few countries, like I know that Ghana responded. Ghana's president put a statement out where he mentioned something quite strong, that we stand with our keep and kin in the US. I felt that was a really strong message. I think our leaders should be standing up for us, because at the end of the day, the history is, you know, we were sold slavery, so we didn't ask for this. So to what extent are some of our African leaders responsible for what's going on? I mean, I've even seen people say if Africa was okay, if they fixed things, you know, we probably have a lot more respect. So, for example, a lot of people in diaspora don't want to be in the diaspora. I, for one, don't want to really be in the UK all the time. My dream is to go back home, but, you know, there are things that I need to consider before I can make that move. So to what extent, what role are African leaders playing to help all of us? And they really should be standing up and saying something. The African Union, someone has to say something that, you know, it's not right the way you treat our people, for example. We really go through a lot. In the UK, there are lots of microaggressions in the workplace, even though it might not be so open or so violent as it's in the US. I think the racism in the UK is covert, so it's very subtle. And also the UK has this issue of class. So we also have to deal with class as well as race in the UK. So what I have to say is, I don't know the question around what can we do to stamp it out. I think the white people have to be accountable. We have to be able to influence them, influence their thinking, influence the leaders, and then us as a collective, Africans, should also stand up to this. Africa needs to get its act together. So that's what I've got to say.
Thank you very much, William. So we see that we have not only the duty to change things, and as Joseph Edmonds said, to move from reform to repair and a reparation. And really, we know that the problem we have in Africa is that our leaders remain silent when things like that happen, not on the outside, but on the continent itself. This morning, we had a Mauritanian talking about slavery and racism in Mauritania, and whereby African leaders, the other presidents of the African Union, never blamed what happened in Mauritania. And it is time for all of us you know, around the world, not only to say what is happening somewhere else, but what is happening on the continent itself. So thank you very much, Wiloma, for bringing up that issue. Now I think I'm going to give the floor to Jocelyn Joshua, who lives in Toronto, but is from? Jocelyn, your mic is off.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm now based in Toronto, but my home is in Guyana. I'm in Guyana most of the time under normal circumstances. And I would like to say that I'm very happy to be part of this initiative. As part of my background, I've spent some time I lived in the deep south. I taught years ago at a Black college in North Carolina. And when I saw what was happening on the screen, what came to me was how, while at the same time feeling the pain, what came to me was how little Black people know about themselves, what is going on, who they are, where they're going within the United States and from country to country where Black people find themselves. Now, what has happened there that we saw with the police aggression, this has been going on all the time. When I lived in North Carolina in the early 1970s, it was going on. It didn't stop. And at this point in time, I'm saying to myself, thank goodness for technology and social media, because it's high time that we begin to get to know each other. You know, we talk about our leaders and so on, but how much attention do those leaders pay to where we came from, who we are, what our history was, and to be able to propagate that? If you see what I mean. I think in terms of other ethnic groups that have developed the mechanism and the networking whereby on a daily basis you're bombarded with their history, you're bombarded with their pain, as if that is all that exists in the world. But what are we, the Black people, doing to get our messages out? And under this lockdown period, I myself have been looking at a lot of the media, Netflix and so on, and the idea came to me, how come Black people don't have their own Netflix? You know, and what can we do to be able to bring that groundswell of solidarity together so that we could move in that direction? You know, you hear noises about, what's his name? Oh, Jesus. But this Black guy that was, he's now in prison, but he was very popular in the 70s, on a series in the 70s. He used to advise, he used to advertise Jello pudding, Bill Cosby. You hear that Bill Cosby was on the verge of acquiring a channel, a television station. But at that point, they figured they had to destroy him, and he had to go. Now, where are the people of means amongst us that we might be able to tap and to discuss questions, not only that touch our economy, but also that would touch our knowledge and our knowledge systems? Because while at the same time we say economy is power, knowledge is also power. And I don't know. I'm just throwing out some ideas there to see the extent to which we might be able to work on them. But I think basically, in order to be able to get that solidarity together, we must pay attention to our history and propagating it amongst ourselves first and foremost.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Thank you very much. And you join in some of the points that Mike made earlier, which is to say we should also have the means, meaning that if you want to do something and you cannot have the means to get to where you want to go, when you ask about why don't we have our own Netflix? Why don't we have powerful means of communications? Because that is important. And if you don't have the means, how can you get there? And how we got there is to have those affluent Black people to come and look into where to invest and what to invest in to be really profitable to Black people at large. Maybe at this point, yes?
May I? I agree wholeheartedly with that. And as I was saying that, I was thinking of something I read a while ago about Kanye West. All of a sudden coming up with all of this money at this point in time. It's as if we think retroactively rather than proactively, if you see what I mean. And I think we in our discussions we have to become more proactive.
Yes. Thank you, Jocelyn. So now I think we haven't heard Hugh. Hugh, are you still with us? Hugh Smith, are you with us? Oh, has he gone?
He needs to unmute.
He's on mute. You on mute. Can you please reactivate your mic? Okay. Hugh?
Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, we hear you.
I was thanking you for putting it on this brainstorming session to share a common issue, racism, which is a global, a universal issue. On the other hand, I think it's such a complex issue and different in the United States, and we have to put it in a historical perspective. Now, I came to the United States when I was 14 years old. I went to high school, college, and graduate school here. So I have a background in the old American structure, the Constitution, and so forth. Racism in the United States is different from that, and especially in addressing this issue from other countries, because we have a constitution, we have a structure which is different from others. But first and foremost, I think it's important to look at the racism in the United States from a historical perspective. Unlike Senegal, Sierra Leone, and other countries, the United States, the history of racism started with slavery, which you didn't have in Senegal or Sierra Leone. So you have to understand that institutional and systemic racism in the United States based on slavery. And after 1865, when the Emancipation Proclamation and the slaves were freed, you had following that, you had the Reconstruction. And you had the, what we call legal racism, Jim Crow. And if you want to learn a little more about Jim Crow, read Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. Also, I would recommend to read Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy, that came out of a movie on Just Mercy, and you can really understand this. But the Jim Crow, where you had legal people who were just walking on the other side of the street could be arrested for just because they were Black. So you didn't have this type of experience in, let's say, in Senegal or Sierra Leone or Ghana. So you have to understand the racism in the United States is very pervasive. It's very different from what we know, or when I grew up as a boy until I was 14 years old in Jamaica. So this is very important. The other thing that is extremely important is to understand the United States, the governmental structure, the checks and balances, where you have the executive, Trump, you have the legislative, which is the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and you have the Supreme Court. So you have these checks and balances. And I mentioned this as being very important because a lot of my African brother, even my wife who's recently said, well, why don't they do this? Why don't you change that? You can't change that. Or why didn't Obama do that? One man just doesn't change the system. We had a president, a black president. We had the Attorney General Holder, and then Lynch, who were Attorney General, and so forth. And you cannot just change the system that way, or you cannot effectuate change in the United States, especially addressing racial issue, without getting the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the executive, the presidency, to really get them together. So as Barbara mentioned and Joe mentioned, voting is key to vote these people out so we can control the Senate, we can control the executive, the presidency, and the House of Representatives. In addition, education is important. But in the United States, it's different from Senegal or Sierra Leone. In the United States, we have a decentralized system. We have states' rights. You have the education that Joseph mentioned, that can be, the states are in charge of education. You can put together programs in a state and approve them, but they differ from state to state. So in some states that have very few blacks, or a Republican state government will not, or a Republican educational people who are from the Republican Party, or who oppose this type of innovative inclusion of Black history and addressing racism, is done on a state-to-state basis. It's not universal. The federal government is not in charge of the educational system. It becomes involved if there is an issue with interstate and so forth, where the federal government can intervene, such as in Little Rock and so on. So we have a very complex system. So when we talk about addressing and solving, we have a common problem, but a problem that you can address in Senegal or other countries, or even in England, is different in addressing it in the United States because of our decentralized political system. And it's important to understand this. The other point I'd like to make is with regard to the solidarity or the lack thereof. I fully agree with the young lady from London. I'm surprised to see the tepid response, especially from a country such as Nigeria, South Africa. In South Africa, I was disappointed because African Americans played a key role in dismantling or keeping awareness in terms of the apartheid system. We had Trans-Africa and Randall Robinson, who went to jail numerous times for protesting in front of the South African embassy in Washington, D.C. So, the response in Africa, I was truly disappointed that we have a strong response in Copenhagen, all the way in New Zealand and Australia, Berlin, and yet we had such a tepid response from the governments in Africa. And finally, when we talk about training, when we address the issue of what can be done, I hope we address the issue of the training. Years ago, I am a retired State Department official, such as Barbara Howard, and we had a police training for policemen from Africa And today, I'm not, AID doesn't do any police training anymore in security, but I'm sure it's done. Some government entity in the US provides this training and to police forces in Africa, and the militarization of these, of the police force is a concern, which is something which we may want to address as a common issue. So I look forward to examining some of the solutions in more thoroughly in the future when we have other sessions.
Thank you very much,
Sorry
you.
for being so long-winded.
Thank you very much, you. You brought some light on how it's been complicated in the US because of the fact that you do not have you have a decentralized system whereby each state has its own policy as regards education. And at the same time, we know that because of the way the system is established in the states, you cannot get to where you want to get if you don't have all those concerns, meaning the Senate, the legislature, the executive, and the judicial together. And at no time, it seems that we can have all the stars being aligned to get where we want to go, which means to really abolish what white supremacy court, because that is a very long journey to go before we get there. We know that, of course, that should be our goal on the continent of the Americas. And of course, we should be together for those fights on America and the fights on Africa. But and thank you also, you, for having mentioned two of the biggest states in Africa, Black Africa, Nigeria, and South Africa, and mostly South Africa. Because what you're talking about, United States, in fact, we also had in South Africa, whereby you could be killed because you're Black and you're somewhere where you shouldn't be. So the systems were very similar, although we didn't have, it was not the system of slavery that brought that there, but it was of the fact that the whites decided to come and stay there as they did in the States. So as such, even though there was no slavery as what happened in the States, you had the same mindset of the whites coming in Africa and deciding this is their land today. And as from there, if you're Black and you're somewhere where you shouldn't be, you could be killed. So we have really certain similarities which were in South Africa and which you still have in the United States, in such a way that when you had bastards, because when I went to Namibia in 1989, the bastards, as they say, they call themselves bastards. It's the only part of the world where you use such a word and you're proud of being it, were, of course, the children born from Black and white, and of course, not in wedlock, and called themselves bastards, but felt they were superior to the Blacks. And I think that even when we say that what is happening is not, it doesn't stem from slavery, we can understand that the mindset of those who brought slavery on the American continent had the same mindset when they started establishing themselves in Africa. So now I think enough for me. I'm going to give the floor to Turia, because we still have two people who haven't spoken. Turia?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Toria. I'm an attorney, and I am the mother of two young children, two daughters. And last Wednesday, I went to my first protest with my kids. So just to give you an idea, I have 40 years old, almost 40 years old, 39 actually. And for the first time of my life, I felt the necessity to do something at least, because I live in a very white, I would say predominantly white neighborhood. And my daughters for the past 4 years were the only Black kids in the elementary school. So of course, I wouldn't say that they were victim of racism, but there were some, you know, some words that were exchanged sometimes, or some look, and that's why this time, because the protest was in my city, I was almost feeling the need to go and protest, because it's important to, I think, that we as ourselves actually, we do something, and also to teach our kids what is okay, what is not okay, and they have to do something for themselves actually, because I have very mixed feelings when I see all these protests and all these signs. I think the most shocking for me is white silence equals white violence. It is as if people are discovering things actually, because for me, everybody knew what was happening, but today they just, I don't know. For me, I don't know if I'm overly suspicious, but I just think that we have to wait and see, and that's why I think that the people that would be able to do something is really us actually, and I think that we have to think right now, how can we do on a very personal level, what can we do on our, you know, sometimes people are just refrain from doing something because they said, oh, it's not, well, it is useless. But I think that we should do at least something, everybody at his own level. For example, I'm an attorney, and I think that now I will be maybe more invested in how I can help my community by participating in an organization or doing at least something, and doing my part. And the other thing that I really think that we should do is maybe be more aware of how we spend and where we spend our money, because I think that the only way people are ready to make a change is to understand the economic repercussions. For example, I have decided not to go to Home Depot anymore because I didn't know that Home Depot was supporting the Trump campaign, for example. The same with Bed Bath & Beyond. So if we decide, for example, and you see that in all the other communities, they are spending their money in their community. So now I think that it is time for us as a group, as a community, to spend our money in Black business. And if we have this kind of mentality, maybe we will wait more, and our words would be heard. Yes, so it was just.
Thank you very much, Turia. Thank you. And of course, bringing up what we can do on our own level. And that is what we did, Medina and myself, when we saw what was happening, to say, okay, what can we do? How can we ask people who would maybe have the same concerns and talk about it and see how we can do even if it's just a little bit of a stone to be part of the brick, which will build, let's start there. So that is the reason why, what can we do on our own levels as individuals? You as a mother from Africa, immigrant from Africa, and having two daughters being brought up in America. What can I do? And you started. Business is something. Business is one of the key solutions, is to spend in Black businesses, is to support Black businesses, is to try and do whatever we can to give the support needed to help Black businesses grow. We're going to go to the first participant, to intervener. Claire is the one left, and then we'll do a second round. Claire? Claire, are you with us? Claire Stoessel, are you with us? Your mic is not on, Claire.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute it.
All right.
It's now unmuted. Okay. Well, I'm really happy to have joined in this discussion today. I'm not sure how concrete my suggestions will be, but this whole thing has really been turning around in my head for the past week. And what I found particularly striking is that even though we've experienced so many horrors in terms of racist acts in the United States and elsewhere, this time it's different. And so many people, whether they're Blacks, whites, all races, everybody feels concerned this time. They know that something is different. And you can see it in the anchors on TV who can't refrain from crying in the middle of their programs. You can see it in people who are out in throngs demonstrating. So what I think this means is that there's a momentum there, not just in the US, but everywhere. I can't remember seeing this kind of worldwide reaction to a horrendous episode such as this. So I think that we need to strike while the iron is hot and see what we can do. Now, when I think of racism, I don't think we can confine our comments to racism, because racism goes hand in hand with injustice. And in the US, yes, the emphasis is on race, but in some of our countries, it's a question of justice. And I think that we have to work on both fronts. In Jamaica, where I'm from and where I am at present, we have had a very proactive government that has done a lot to combat apartheid and other forms of injustice in the world. But I think that in Jamaica and elsewhere, we have been patting ourselves on the back deservedly, but we also need to say, okay, can we take it further now? Where do we go from here to improve our societies and the world at large? And I think that some of the things that we need to do, we need to start with the whole question of self-image. One of the speakers mentioned it earlier on. I think that part of the problem is our Black kids, as Jocelyn said, they don't know who they are. And they don't know how much they have to be proud of. They don't know, they don't know about fantastic Black history. That's one thing. So that's our kids. There's also the question of the people that our kids are interacting with. They're white and Asian and other ethnic group classmates. Very often there's a question of just ignorance that's at play, because they do not know really what Africa, Africans, Black people are all about. A lot of them are still back there, seeing us as constantly needy, we're going for aid and all this stuff. No, I'm not saying we are to see ourselves in their mirror, because that is another problem. I'm tired of these articles where we say, and the European press says this, and no. We need to build our own self-image, our own self-confidence, and we have a lot to build on and to build with. And it comes back to what so many people have been talking about today, the whole question of education. How do we get the point across to our youngsters and youngsters worldwide that they just don't understand what's going on in Africa and among Africans? So we have to get the African history out there. We have to get our culture out there. And in addition to that, we need to use the momentum that's there now for what the Americans like, a term I don't particularly like, but they like to call it a teachable moment. But I've noticed that, for example, my grandkids were born and they're growing up in Switzerland. And they're going to be out marching on Tuesday because quite apart from their reaction to what's happening in the US, they're having problems now in Switzerland because once this whole movement started in the US, this whole momentum, some of the kids in the schools in Switzerland, although Switzerland tends to be a very liberal, open, and very well integrated society, but even there, you had isolated cases of kids who started when they had corona, attacking the Chinese kids and making unpleasant comments about people of other races. So this is a time to help countries like those who want to do the right thing to understand what they need to do. And what they need to do is to tell the world about Black history. They need to teach their kids Black history. I understand the point that was made about the US, how everything depends on the state you're in. Well, if they can't get with the program, at least we can work with the ones that are prepared to get with the program and have a curriculum ready that will help people, both our kids and kids who are not of African origin, to understand what we're all about. I think that that is really key to progressing. And I think that, I don't want to take any more time, but I think that people have been talking about building on Black businesses. I think that's an excellent idea. And there are certain areas where I think that we can benefit a lot from each other. And I'm thinking in particular of traditional knowledge, things like traditional medicines. There's a lot of room for linkages at various levels. And I think this is one area where the diaspora countries, in the Caribbean, in Cuba, Brazil, all these countries, a lot of research is being done on our traditional medicines. So that is one area that I think we really need to build up with our African brothers and sisters. And I see that they've been trying to move ahead with their treatments for COVID and all of that. So I think that we need to look at the business sector, yes, the education sector, yes, but also the science, because Africa used to be the world leader in science. We can get there again. And I think that one of the avenues to getting there would be working again on our traditional knowledge.
Thank you very much. And that brings us also to one thing I would like to say is that everything that has been debated and some of these bright ideas and proposals that have been put on the table, it's what we're trying to achieve in organizing as a mirror of Black Black History Month in the States. We started the first Black History Month on the African continents when Melina Seymour decided to organize it in Benin in Africa in February this year. But now we're going to have the new form, which is going to be Africa History Month and on the African continent. And the first new edition will take place in Senegal. And how we are going to organize the whole month. The first month will deal with our spirituality, our traditions, which means about how we treat nature, how we treat the environment, how we were before we got all these different colonizations. Then the second week will be a memorial type of tourism, whereby we will go into depth into these different things. And the third week will be the week where we're going to discuss about African history and African history from antiquity to today. And of course, the last week will be devoted to a summit of elderly people, elderly Africans and diaspora, because we believe that all these things we've been talking about, education, science, culture, and so on, have been transmitted by elderly people. And in the African tradition, it's in fact the elderly who really hold on our knowledge. And it is why one of the African writers called Ampateba said, in Africa, when an elderly person passes away, it's like a library being burnt because of the knowledge of elderly. So that is how the whole month will be organized. And we hope and really sincerely wish that this encounter will become a must for all Africans around the world to meet once a year on the African continent as Africans to find solutions and durable solutions. So this is one of the steps that we are trying to put. So now I'll let the second round go through. Joseph Edmonds, I think that you wish to intervene. So the floor is yours. Your mic is not on.
Yes. So I mean, one of the things that you know, that really jumps out to me, and I want us to continue to push on, is this you know, Black internationalist, Black diasporic kind of consciousness, which we've got to figure out a way to build that, and that's building from a number of different vectors. You know, we're talking about going back to the continent of Africa, or having Black students in the United States study more about Africa. But when I talk to a lot of my students, they know nothing about Black populations in Mexico or Brazil or in other places in Europe, right? There's so many fragments and fractures that we need to address and speak to. And so one of the things that I want us to think about as we think about you know, events like this, and I definitely think that really thinking about religion, I'm a religious studies scholar, is so important in this moment, right? How religion has shaped us and kept us, especially Afro-diasporic religions that usually fall out of a lot of our conversations when we're talking about African-American history or African-American discourse. But the intervention that I would like to push at, especially as we think about coming together and thinking more broadly, is how do we, again, you know, I'm one of the persons who's thinking about how do we resource this kinds of trip, right? Or how do we resource this kind of coming together so that this does not become another opportunity for only the elite or the privileged to be able to take part in these conversations, right? We want this to be a democratic, egalitarian kind of moment or opportunity. And so if that's really what we want, we have to think critically about how we make it accessible to as broad of a demographic and an audience as possible. So I want to push on that.
Thank you very much, Joe. And maybe I could ask to everybody who have participated in this encounter, if it would be possible for you to send me any written contribution that you would like us to take into account so that we can see where we go forward, when's the next step when we meet again, and so on. So that would be good to receive, you know, written contributions from you. So can I ask Rufus to give one of the closing words?
Yes, I really appreciate all of the input and you all sharing your experiences and your recommendations. I think there's a couple of things that we need to be very, very conscious of. and that is identifying specific goals with measurable outcomes that we would like to achieve or we need to achieve. And that becomes the root of our existence. Because if we're going to have a program or an initiative that is sustainable, it has to be sustainable towards a certain and specific goal. The other thing I would like to remind us about is the environment today. The worldwide environment today is very much influenced by the two major topics in the news right now. One is COVID, and the other is racism. And one of the commonalities about those is that they provide a common enemy. And a common enemy is one of the rallying points of any successful revolution. Okay, so eventually COVID is going to go away. But because it was a catalyst to get people to say, we can do something together, then let it be a reminder that Black people can come together and further our own interests because we have a common enemy, and that common enemy is racism. The other part of that scenario is ownership of our own success. If we don't take ownership of our success, then we will not be successful. So I'm not going to continue to preach on those 3 points, but I think that, yeah, that'll be enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rufus, I would appreciate if you could send us, by writing some of these guidelines. I would call them guidelines because, of course, having specific goals, we know that we have two main goals, is combating racism and building towards African unity, but we also have to have sub-goals. And of course, it would be helpful to have some of your input in that. I see that Hugh is, Hugh wants to intervene. Okay, Hugh.
I just wanted to say that I hope the next meeting, this is pretty open-ended meeting where everyone comes in and discuss. Have a more structured meeting, it would be more helpful with an agenda for the future. And we could talk about some common issues and solutions. Probably would be more effective having a more structured, more with an agenda.
Okay. Mike?
Well, Rufus and I have known each other for 40 years. We normally close a meeting about the same way, so there's no reason for me to take any additional time. You can just copy him.
Okay, and we are waiting for your contribution, written contribution, so that will help us for the next meeting and to see how we're going to organize it. Okay. Thank you. Who else would like to give a last word before we close the meeting? Turia, would you?
May I come in?
Yes. Who's that?
That's me. That's Tanella. I'm sorry, my bandwidth is very low, so I can have my video on. This is Tanella from.
Okay, Stanella, I thought that you said you would not, so that's why I didn't give you the floor. Okay.
No, that's okay. It has been so interesting that I thought, maybe I should come in. Well, thank you everybody for your enlightened views. It has been really very, very interesting and very salient points have come on. I think I would start from where I would like to see us eventually as people. It may sound like utopia, but this is the ultimate goal, that we should get to a point and to a level where these distinctions, black, white, brown, would eventually become irrelevant. That might be a long-term goal, but that's eventually where we want to get to, where there should be no distinction whatever in terms of how people are treated, in terms of how people see other people, not in terms of their color, but in terms of what they have to to contribute as people, intelligent people, people who have something to offer to their communities and so on. I think that's where we should be getting to. But I think it has to start with, it is starting now. This is unprecedented. What is going on now is clearly unprecedented. We've never seen it at this scale before. But reparations, we've been hearing about reparation for so long. I think this is the moment. We should not lose this momentum to bring back this whole issue. I see bits and pieces of things happening in the US, churches getting together, whites apologizing to blacks in their congregation and so on. But this is very ad hoc. How can it get to a point where it can become a state thing, you know, a government thing, a white thing, for everybody, not just groups of people apologizing to each other? How can it be a collective globally that blacks have been maltreated, mistreated, they're so disadvantaged? How can this come about, this reparation dialogue? It started at some point and then it phased out. Is it something we need to bring back? Is it something the African Union needs to bring back? I don't know. Maybe let's keep it at the backs of our minds. I think that we do not know enough. We in the African continent, we do not know enough in our curriculum, in our education systems, about what is happening to African Americans in the US. We don't know enough. We know about European history. Up till now, our schools are teaching European history, and they're teaching all kinds of things. But what is happening to our Black brothers and sisters in the United States, other than what we see in videos, other than what we have just seen happen to this young man who was killed? We need to have it firmly in our curriculum. We do not know enough. I remember when I went to Jamaica for the first time, and the guy at the desk, the customs desk, he looked at my passport and he said, "You from Africa?" I said, "Yes." "Africa, Africa?" I said, "Yes, Africa." Somehow I felt, you know, that was a new consciousness for me. And the same thing happened when I went to Colombia, in Barranquilla and Santa Marta, that part, the coast, the Caribbean coast. And I saw Black Colombians. I never knew they were there. And when they saw me and they found out I was from Africa, it was the same feeling they had. "Are you from Africa? You mean Africa, Africa?" Somehow I felt privileged. I felt privileged to have come and to be living here in the continent, because we were the ones who they brought back. And our colleagues, our compatriots elsewhere were the ones who stayed behind. We were the ones who came back. So I felt a certain sense of privilege, and at the same time, sympathy, empathy, knowing what our African-American friends are going through. It really struck me. So I think identity, knowing who we are, knowing what is happening to African-Americans in the US, we need to learn more about it. And it makes me ask the question, all these years that Black History Months have been organized, events have been organized around Black History Month, why is it that we're still faced with this situation of disadvantage, of racism? Why is it? Is there something that we're not doing right? Because it should be a progression. Things should be improving from one level to another, but apparently it is not. So how can we move from one level to another where these things will become eventually, as I said, irrelevant? Yes, the African Union. This is where I have a great respect for the former ambassador, the former African Union ambassador to the US. She has been trying to rally around Africans who are there in the US, many of them experts, specialists, very, very highly educated people, but who do not want to return to the continent to see it grow. So that people have this idea that Africa is still a backward continent, is still a dark continent, and we know that there are many more doctors, Ghanaian doctors and Nigerian doctors in Ghana in the US than in Ghana and Nigeria. So why don't they come back and help build up this continent so we can have a sense of worth, a sense of achievements, which we can then share with our African-American brothers and sisters in the US. By the way, there's a new movement. They're coming back. Just as our people are going to Europe and going to the US, the African-Americans are beginning to come back. They came to Sierra Leone. They came to discover their roots. They came to own land. They were given passports. This is a movement which I think will continue. It will grow. And it augurs well for the relationship between us and our brothers and sisters, African Americans in the US. I'd like to stop here for a while.
Thank you very much, Stanella. I would just say that you have raised, of course, saying the ultimate goal for all of us, for humanity, would to come to a certain point where your color would be irrelevant, and what would be important is who you are and what you have to give to your society. That's the ultimate gain. But before we get there, we have a lot to do. And to start us, you know, when you ask how come it's been about 50 years that Black History Month is being celebrated in the US, and things move so slowly that you wonder if it has ever been celebrated. And this is the reason why we felt that we have to put it back to bring it to Africa, to bridge the ocean and see how effectively, by doing this, by building these bridges, we could make Africans on the continent more aware of what is happening to our sisters and brothers on the American continent, and making our brothers and sisters away from Africa to be aware of what is happening on Africa. And we felt that one of them is to organize something which is going to be an encounter, a world international encounter of all of us on the African continent. So we still have people who would like, we don't have much time left, but we still have about half an hour. Jocelyn, do you want to intervene?
Yeah, I'm sorry I have to leave shortly, but I just wanted to say how much I appreciate this the discussions that we've been having, and I keep insisting. We've been doing this all the time. The organization we worked for, UNESCO, has been into a whole lot of information in terms of racism and the histories of Africa and so on. That information is out there. I think we need to find a way of getting it to the ears of the Blacks in America, the Blacks in each country in Africa, the Caribbean and other parts of the world. Because I still maintain that that knowing about yourselves and the history, your history, are most important. Like you mentioned about South Africa and the apartheid in South Africa and so on. A whole lot of the other Black diaspora were there helping South Africa under the apartheid regime. Yet, where did the xenophobia come from? How much do the South Africans themselves know about that kind of support that they were having, you know? But I just wanted to say that I found it most interesting, and I'd be very happy to continue, you know, making a contribution in as far as I can, as we form up our ideas and we move towards action. Thank you, Vande.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Should I give the floor to, I don't, okay, I see that Sheikh would like to intervene.
Yes, I've been listening to all of you, and as a young man and very connected to the new technologies and information that goes beyond where I come from or where I've been, because I was very lucky in my life to have been traveling in many countries, mostly in Africa, Europe, and now the American continent, the North America and South American continent. And what I've been seeing these past few years is that us young folks are very lazy people. And one thing that I've learned also is that if we want people to know about our history, we shouldn't consider that, well, it's there and they should go and get it, because there are many means nowadays to get it. I think if we are concerned about Black people overall to know about their history, we should find means to get it easier to them and to make sure that they will have it, because the ultimate goal is for them to get it, not even to search for it. Search would be a second step for people who are very curious. But many things that I've seen, I've been looking for them, and I realize the more I go, the more I realize that, oh, there are a lot of things out there, but we just don't know where it is, or it's not easy to get it. Or so for me, I think it is very important, like Jocelyn was saying that earlier, why we don't have a Black Netflix. And I will go even beyond that. I think we need to find a way to aggregate those informations, to make it easier. You know, the internet is so vast. There are so many things. And most of the young folks do not make the difference between education and information. Those are two different things. Information is very available. Education is probably less available, is more structured in some way. And I think as a way to solve the problem as well is, and I'm always saying that, well, I don't understand why these very wealthy people cannot help to make that happen. Like a channel or a website or an infrastructure that can aggregate information. You can search on any matter. Egypt, you can search on a condition of white African-American slavery, colonization. You can, somewhere where you can get everything and or at least like point you to where you can get it. Make it easier for people to get the information, because ultimately the goal is to find the information.
Thank you very much, Cher. That is very interesting. Maybe you young folks can put such a sort of platform whereby we can aggregate all those things which could be made available to people, to Black people around the world. And as you yourself said, you young people are lazy. Don't find, oh, there is a problem with it. Try to see from now until next time that you can propose to us, maybe aggregate a number of young people to see how such a proposal can become a reality. Because of course, we have a lot of things that we have to do along the road, and each and every of these proposals can be part and parcel of being able to get where we wish to get, which is, of course, abolition of injustice, abolition of racism, getting into unity, not only Pan-African unity, but unity wherever we are, getting to abolish all these injustices wherever and whatever and with whoever. And I think that, of course, having platforms like that will help into doing it, while at the same time we improve education, and use all the syllabuses and all the means, because now with mock education, we can do so many things at such a size that is unbelievable. When I take myself, I would never have thought I could conduct a meeting with people in the States, people in Africa, people in France, people in so many different places, people in Jamaica. And here we are today. And what did it happen? What made it happen? Because of COVID. Because COVID pushed us to develop this tool to connect. So this is one important thing. We have now a very strong tool which will help us connect or reconnect, not only with our roots, our history, but also in putting and pooling together all our resources. And that will come faster than what we think, because at this point of moment, as we said, it's a momentum, and we have to keep the momentum going, not let it go away as some of the other things that happen. Joe Edmonds, do you want to intervene for the last word? No, you don't want to intervene? Who else would like to come in before we close the session? Turia, do you want to? Who else before I close the session? And don't forget, whoever wants to really contribute so that for the next encounter, we would have an agenda and be more focused. It will be appreciated. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I just wanted to add that.
Sorry, just a minute, Toria. I just wanted to say goodbye because I have to leave now. Thank you all very much. I'll be in touch. I'll send something in writing that I hope will
Thank you, Claire.
Make a contribution to our efforts. Thanks a lot for inviting me. Sorry, I have to rush. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Turia, yes?
So I just wanted to say that we were talking about the Black History Month, and we should see as well how we can make it more inclusive, and for people to understand that Black History Month, well, Black history is part of history. It's not something just, you know, for Black people. And how can we make it more open to other communities? Because right now I live under the impression that people think that Black History Month events are for Black people only, actually. And we just have to see how we can make it more open, more inclusive. So.
Well, the French is l'histoire, le mois de l'histoire de l'Afrique, which means that it's really inclusive to all Africa, et de ses diasporas. So it's histoire, le mois de l'histoire de l'Afrique et de ses diasporas. So it's all inclusive to Africa, from north to south, east to east, west to east, and also to its different diasporas. It's just that we wanted to keep Black History Month to show the origin, that it originated from the States, so that we don't lose the roots. We're going to roots, so we don't lose the root of this encounter, which when it is transplanted to Africa has another color. And we kept the original name of Black History Month, but the French, which is the new version on the continent and in French, is Mois de l'Histoire de l'Afrique et de ses diasporas. So African History Month and its diasporas.
Yes, I was talking about people who would come to the event, actually, not only Black. So how can we make the Black History Month actually more open to other communities? When I say communities, it's white, Asian. How can we just open it up, actually? I don't know if you see what I mean exactly.
Well, my dear, I think that there comes a time when we have to be between us. I don't have any problem of being people saying, c'est du communautarisme, okay? I think that we, being here today, at this point of time and event of what happened in Minneapolis, we know we have a problem that other people don't have. And I don't have any problem whatsoever. If they want to join in, well and good. But what I'm saying is this is Africa and its diasporas. Now, whoever wants to come and join in Africa and its diaspora are welcome. But we have to think about ourselves. We have to find solutions for the situation which has been going on for centuries. And of course, as Stanella said, the ultimate game and the ultimate goal is to get to a point where this encounter would lead to the fact that race will become irrelevant. But we have to start somewhere. And starting somewhere was to start and look into what have happened, where we are, where to go from where we are, where to go to. And I think that we need that. That is the reason why, for example, today was an open encounter. But now we need to focus more, to look into some of the proposals that are going to be put forward and see how next time we'll be more focused to get into more precise guidelines so that we can get to where we wish to go.
How about structures, Nde? I'm sorry to come in. I'm sorry to interrupt at this point. I was going to ask about structures. What kinds of structures can we put in place? Because quite frankly, I think very few people know about Africa Day, the celebration of African independence. We know very little about it. What about our schools? I think we need to involve the younger generation as much as possible, because we expect them to take up the baton, to take up the gauntlet. How can we have this in our schools, even at national level? What kinds of structures can we have to make it permanent? We talked about curriculum, yes. We're looking at our curricula and seeing how we can inject some of these facts into our curriculum, history curriculum or whatever. But how about the structures on the ground in schools so that it becomes a permanent feature on Africa Day that is celebrated in these countries? What can the African Union do?
Okay.
Or UNESCO?
Okay, Stanella, so you're talking what kind of structures? Can you please, on your side, try to think about it and focus something on that? Okay, I think if each of us thinks about something which can get us to different specific goals to attain, I think that for the next 3 years, we're given to ourselves, let's say, next 3 years. I know that the African Unity has goals to 2063, but before we get there, we just would like to see what we can achieve within the 3 years. And each of us, for example, you talked about structure. We could, each of us, send something and see how for the next meeting we can derive from those proposals things that seem essential in the immediate in the immediate time and the near future. I don't know if that is agreeable to you, Barbara. I don't know if Barbara is still around and if she wanted to say a last word, because we don't have much time left. We have only 10 minutes. Or Joe, or whoever hasn't yet given a second round and closing word. Is there anybody who would like to come in? Well, it seems that
Hugh?
Yeah?
May I make a remark? I would just like to go back to what Turia had mentioned about, you know, make it more inclusive. And the point she is making, which I support, is that it should not just focus on educating the Black community when it comes to Black history, but to transcend that the diaspora and African Americans and African community and the diaspora, but also to be inclusive of Asians and whites. Now, one of the things we see that is going on now, which is very effective, is that we see and we come to realize that we won't have any, you know, durable or long-term sustainable change unless we get the participants of a broader community, whites, Asians, and you name it. We cannot just solve the problem alone. We need others. And we see in the marches, if you look at what's happening now, which did not happen years ago when you had demonstrations and protests, we see more whites and young kids from high school. I went in Bethesda and I saw families with children of 8, 10 years old, 5, 6 years old, holding signs of Black Lives Matter. So I think this is what Turia was trying to say, is to broaden that that support mechanism.
Yes, I can understand that, and I do entirely agree. But what I mean is that we cannot, by stating this African History Month, and also be able to put everybody in the naming. What I mean is that we are going to have a gathering that is open to everybody who wants to join in, but our main focus is going to be Africans and its diasporas. We're not saying we don't want other people to join in, they can join in, but our main focus is really Africa and its diaspora. And of course, we know that if we don't have other people on board, we will not be able to fix it, because they are part of the problem. The whites are part of the problem. So we cannot fix the problem if the other party is not there. But what I mean is that we call it the way we call it, but at the same time, we will make it open so that people know that they can come wherever they're from, if they wish to come and join in and construct with us. I think that is understandable, and that is what we, of course, as organizers are looming at. But we have to have a focus, and the focus is Africa and its diaspora. I hope that Turia understands. And of course, if there are proposals that can be made so that other people can understand this is an inclusive and open encounter, and not, we don't say we don't want, as they used to say, we don't want Blacks. We're not saying we don't want other people. We're just saying, okay, we're focusing on ourselves and other people can join in. Thank you. So if nobody has something to add to this, I would say thank you very much for having attended this first encounter, which I hope will lead to something very concrete and to serve our people on the continent and outside of the continent. And I'm expecting to receive some of your written contributions. Thank you very much, Joseph Edmonds, Mike Bisley, Rufus White, Joe Noel, Barbara Howard, Stanella Beckley. Rufus is no longer here, I thought. Oh, yes, he's here. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Cher. Thank you, Vilorma, who left, Jocelyn and Claire. Thank you, all of us, all of you. Thank you very much. And see you for the next meeting. And I'm expecting for your written contributions. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening for those who are still on daylight. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.